All right, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. This is Accuracy in America. I'm Don Irvine, joined once again by Brian McNichol.
Good morning. Hello, deplorables, drags, despicables, chumps, Neanderthals, and dog-faced pony soldiers.
I see you really did get a haircut, didn't you?
I did. Clean me up, man. Did it all with the clippers.
That was the whole family, or at least the kids too, right?
Yeah. It's a family thing. We always all go together.
That's cool. All right. Well, I think we've got plenty of news. We'll start off with these tragic shootings in Boulder, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia. There's not much you can say about it from the human element in terms of the tragedy that has occurred in these cities. But I think what I want to I want to talk with you about, though, is just kind of the ramifications. Some of the things that happened there. In Atlanta, we had kind of this thing about Asian American hate or whatever, and then in Colorado, we had other things going on there too. But the end result is, between the two of these, is just that there's a huge push by the Democrats, by the liberals, for gun control, banning assault weapons, that type of thing. So I want you to kind of go through and give me your feelings about what's going on here.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, in Atlanta, so the guy's problem appeared to be that he was consumed with porn, and he was, obsessed with these massage parlors and whatnot, and people walk around saying, "Oh, the dignity of sex workers," and these are victimless crimes, and why is any of this even against the law? And porn for all and everything. There are very real costs to it. There are marriages being broken up. There are relationships being ruined, ended, because they're different people. They're desensitized. They look at their fellow humans differently, and the change is not necessarily favorable. In fact, it's usually not favorable. So, there are costs. There are victims to those crimes. There's 10 of them in Atlanta now. You can't blame it all on that. I mean, there's a lot of steps between, watching too much porn and shooting up a bunch of massage parlors, right? But that guy was pretty clear about what his problem was. I think the Asian hate thing is way overrated. I read this thing, and it's like, there was 270 events reported in the country of Asia hate last year. And it's like, there's 270 events of dang near everything reported in the country over the course of a year, right? It just, you have some connections there. Do you see that? I just don't, I don't see a lot of people being mean to Asians. I don't ever hear people talk about it, so maybe it's, the circles I run in or whatever, but, I think that's a story cooked up to make some other things, dominoes fall a little easier. As for Colorado, this guy looks like, it looks like ISIS is reforming. It looks like, that whole movement, the things they're going after are coming back. And and I think, people can argue with this, but I think that it has to do with, perceived vulnerability in the White House now. Trump was pretty clear about his stance on ISIS and how it would be dealt with. And, basically his stance or whatever was, if you're in ISIS, you're probably going to end up dead. So, a lot of people took aim to that. I mean, he wiped this whole thing out in about a year and a half. And now, people perceive weakness in our foreign policy all over the globe. And, you're seeing North Korea's backfiring missiles. China's back dissing our diplomats, wave of huge waft of just disrespect for us coming because, people are looking at our president and saying he can be beaten.
All right. So at first, my thing on Atlanta, now most of the people that were killed were of Asian descent. But that doesn't mean that he was targeting these people at all. I mean, I know I'm walking on thin ice potentially here, at least being extremely politically incorrect. But we are talking about people in an industry that's a little sketchy, maybe, kind of a thing like this. I have a hard time. I mean, there are humans, there are individuals. I bemoan the loss of life in this case, but I also have this problem that we have this tendency to kind of elevate these people that have working in these kind of sketchy just areas that you and I would not be proud of working in, and kind of elevating them to some kind of hero status or something like that. They're martyrs or whatever. This guy was a troubled guy. I mean, he had a lot of issues. Look, when they kept doing this AAPI thing, I'm like, what the heck is that? I didn't know what that was.
Go look that one up.
My mother was Japanese, my wife was Korean. It's like, okay, so I guess do I qualify as the Asian American Pacific Islander? I have no idea. I mean, all these acronyms and things pop up, and I'm like, what are you talking about? But I think
we call you general, you're short now, or okay, we're about to get in serious trouble here.
I know we're going to get really in trouble. But being someone who's grown up, being half Asian, right? And marrying an Asian, raising kids that are basically mostly Asian, they didn't really experience much of hatred or anything at all throughout their life. There wasn't anything really directed at it. I think you're right, though. What they've done here is that they talk about all these incidences of anti-Asian hate, and now the media. I mean, when you turn on the television, that's like what gets front and center. It's like, oh, some woman gets beaten up, whatever. All of a sudden, that becomes the big story,
the big issue. That's right.
Yeah,
that's how they create issues.
Is it out of the ordinary? These things happen. How many? I mean, in this world with 300. In the States with 320, 330 million people, whatever the official number is right now, things are going to happen against all ethnicities. But now all of a sudden, this has just been elevated. I think that there's this narrative that the media thinks that they have to follow, and so now they're creating stuff that really wasn't that big an issue. I mean, to me, the biggest discrimination or thing about Asians, if there was any hate, has been really for years in academia and higher education, because there are a lot of people who get upset that Chinese students and whatever, Japanese students, whatever, they have excelled. They get they do very, very well in our nation's colleges, universities, and there are a lot of people that get very angry about that, and they want to kind of ratchet down the number of Asians that get admitted to these things. It's like, okay, there's some discrimination potentially going on there, but it's like there is an answer to that. It's like, do better.
Well, that's what's going on. The school I coach at, Thomas Jefferson, here in Northern Virginia, one of the, they are changing the requirements to get in, the application requirements, basically because the school, the racial makeup of the school is too Asian, right? It's like, a lot of Asians that are here in this area are not rich. And so a public school that offers the top academic, stuff to rival any private school in the area, is an attractive thing for them to go for, and they really celebrate the kids who accomplish it and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot of Asians in the school, and it is widely perceived that if these changes go through, that will be less so. That it's aimed at that. It's like more emphasis on essays and written expression, as opposed to how good are you at math and science. So there's a big debate roiling over like what should Jefferson be, and who should get in, and how should they get in. So it's a lot, and there's a lot of factors at play.
Yeah, look, I mean, the Asian families I know, I've known over the years. I mean, a lot of them, they're kind of working class, good people. A lot of people come over from Korea and these other countries, even Southeast Asia. I mean, they come with a little bit of money if they got that, and then they just basically start a business or work their way up, get a job. They're
the most entrepreneurial people. I think the Koreans demographically in the United States, something like 16% of the Koreans either own a business or they're in a family that owns a business.
Yeah,
which is
no, I wouldn't be.
like
Like,
white
I wouldn't.
people, it's like 7%. So
Yeah, no, I mean, Koreans are very entrepreneurial on that. I mean, you know, my my sister-in-law is very driven in that regard, and we've known lots of people who've started anything from a dry cleaner to a little grocery store, a restaurant, or whatever. It's a big deal. They're hardworking people, and they want their kids to have the best education possible, and they push. I mean, all that fun that was made of the whole Tiger Mom, years ago. There's truth to that. There are Asian parents who push their kids darn hard, especially if you grow up in Korea and Japan and places like that in particular. The competition and the pressure to do well in school is immense. I mean, it
yeah,
is just
that's right.
there's very high pressure situations there, so they're very driven to do this. Our kids in the U.S. not as much, right? I mean, we don't do that as much. So
Right.
that you are going to have some of these kids. I mean, math, those STEM areas. Yeah, a lot of Asian kids do well on that. That's the way so that's the way it works. But yeah, they are. I know. I think what you're talking about at TJ, there has been a movement, I think, across the country to say, okay, these Asians are doing too well. There's too much. We've got to kind of spread this out a little bit, even though it's not the natural order of things. So we need to give more opportunities. They're not even saying, I don't think, really, to say we're going to give opportunities to kids who are as smart or smarter. They just want, they're just trying to say we need to give more opportunities. Period.
Yeah.
Type of a thing like that. So we're seeing a lot of interesting things there. And in Boulder, yeah, I mean, in terms of this, I mean, Bob has chimed in here. The perpetrator in Boulder mass shootings fits at least part of the general profile for past ISIS lone wolf attackers, but more definitive evidence is needed to know for sure. And we definitely will need to learn more and study more and try to figure this out a little bit more. But we had in Boulder, we had none other than who? Kamala Harris's niece tweeting, immediately that it was, this white, this white person was shooting, and that I guess that the majority of shooters are white or that, that she had to walk back that tweet, delete that tweet, but just the ignorance, because it's also a narrative by the liberal left that if there's a mass shooting event, it's some white guy who hates black people type of thing like that. But all the victims in this case were all white, right?
Right.
Right. So
and also some of the strictest gun laws in the country there. So if
right.
gun laws, if they worked, they would have prevented that one. They have all the background checks and all that stuff in place. And Boulder, even more than the rest of Colorado. Boulder's where the University of Colorado is, and it's one of the bluest places in America. So yeah, they're loaded with gun grabbing laws, and to what effect, right? You say, oh well, as long as it's legal somewhere, then it doesn't matter that it's illegal in Boulder, right? But the fact is, there's about 400 million guns in the United States. So if you say, okay, guns are illegal, who's going to turn their gun in? Some law-abiding people will. Swalwell was right about that. But, the criminals, zero criminals are going to give up their guns, right? So you're only disarming the good guys, right? So, and I don't think it looks like that's the gun control push out of this is going to die again too. It looks like Joe Manchin has said already that he can't vote for these things, and he can't. In his state, Trump won West Virginia by a bigger margin than any state in the union. He also won every county in West Virginia. So there's no reason, there's no room for Manchin to support this.
Right. I mean, this is the thing that always gets me about this. I mean, whether Sandy Hook, Parkland, Columbine, now we've got Boulder, Atlanta. We can list we can put together a long list of shootings across the country, and for basically every one, the liberals always come back. This was when they ratchet up their gun ban, gun control machine and everything like this, but they do conveniently forget, and ignore, and cities that have very tight gun control laws, whether or not it's Washington or Chicago and things like that, that there's still problems there. I mean, they have tight gun control, and it hasn't solved the situation. What about
it assumes that, like, of all, someone whose whole life is law breaking, right? Some guy who robs stores and deals drugs for his living, but the gun law, I'll follow that one. All these other laws I break, but the gun law, no, I'm back with that. You know, I mean, the whole principle of it is false.
Yeah, it's just so they're pushing hard, but you're right. I think Manchin, once again, I mean, he's just in that kingmaker position with a lot of stuff, and he has to watch his back for the people in West Virginia in terms of this and what's going on there. But what about the potential threat of President Biden trying to do something like this by executive order?
Well, there's not a whole lot he can do by executive order, and most of what he would do would be strike downable by the courts, right? Heller was pretty clear that gun ownership is an individual right and that states can't restrict it. So, I don't know what he's going to do. I think what they're calling for is nuts. They're talking about, this background checks on private sales. So like if you sell a gun to your brother, you both have to sign up for background checks. No, that's not how things work. The whole thing is not.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to be something that's even remotely workable. But at least the Democrats, the liberals, they're on the lather right now. And from what I'm reading in the press, at least the liberal press, is they're kind of like, well, this actually, Boulder, Colorado may change everything on this. But I don't.
Let me tell you something. If Newtown, Connecticut didn't change everything ain't going to get changed.
Right. No, that's true.
That was their big shot.
Yeah, when it comes to killing of school children, innocent school children, if you cannot enact a nationwide gun control law, and really ratchet this down because of that, it's not going to happen.
Americans recognize that that's not the approach. I mean, Connecticut had really strict gun laws.
Yeah,
and the shooter was in compliance with them. He had registered all his guns, all that stuff was signed up. We can look at mental health in this country, right? That's obviously is a big and growing problem, especially now. The COVID has added to that problem. That's now a bigger hill to climb because of the lockdowns and so forth. But that's where you got to look because people are going to if that guy did not have an AR-15, what would he have done? Right, another weapon that none of them are thinking of. Outlawing right now, although they could, easily move to a new target. A bomb, where instead of managing to shoot 10, you kill everyone in the whole store. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could be. It could have been much worse, right? Because if he doesn't have his gun, it could get a lot worse quickly. So, I mean, I don't see anything coming from it. It'll be some Sturm und Drang, or they're as close to having the numbers to do it as they've ever been. And and there's an interesting thing, and maybe you could comment some on this because you know these guys. Is it seems to me that the NRA is kind of wounded right now and not as fit for this fight as it normally would be. Now, are gun owners of America and others ready to step up and fight this, or what do you know about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about the wounded nature of the NRA. I mean, they've taken a lot of legal hits, so they're still fighting, up in New York, and they're going to move their headquarters, I guess, to Texas now to get out of some of that. But that's hanging over them. I mean, as an NRA member, I have always kind of wondered about the extravagant amount of money that they have spent on things. I mean, LaPierre gets a lot of money, but I mean, gun owners of America, I mean, they're getting some attention. Second Amendment Foundation, Alan Gottlieb, they file a lot of lawsuits. They're definitely trying to fill some of the void and all that. But, there isn't anyone that has the heft of the NRA because they had millions of members. None of these other organizations have that reach,
Right.
So
and they have members who get into it not to fight 2A incursions, but for learn how to shoot, promote the Olympic events that involve shooting and so forth. So I mean, there's the NRA membership is a lot broader than pro 2A people.
Right. I mean, actually, having gone to several NRA conventions, walking the Mammoth exhibit hall, you see you get to understand the wide variety of people who are members of the NRA. You have the people who are gun enthusiasts. They're going to be collectors. Some of them are going to be hunters. Yes, others are getting for protection. There's a lot of talk about the women and classes to teach women how to shoot and kids how to shoot. So what was it, Eddie Eagle, the safety kind of things like that. There's a huge section in there on knives. There's lots of knives, going on over there. There are miniatures, that are there. There are safari type of tours and things like that. It is unbelievable. It's well beyond anything I would have ever imagined, having walked through that hall multiple times over the years. Just unbelievable amount of things to go see. It's a very broad membership.
Diverse.
Yeah, very, 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 very diverse. So it's always really interesting to see that going on here. What is Bob saying here? Bottom line is that if an individual intent on carrying out a mass killing, they'll find the requisite tools to do so. Exactly. Guns, knives, bombs, cars, trucks, it matters not. Well, that's very true. I mean, that's right. If you are hell-bent on doing something, you will find a way to do it.
Right.
Regardless.
This guy's obviously was hell-bent. This guy was obviously
regardless
planning and, focused on it and was going to make it happen one way or the other.
Right. All right. Let's move on to one of Biden's big struggles. We talked about it before, which is this ongoing border crisis. The administration cannot seem to figure out what to do with this. I thought it was really interesting because on this past Sunday, so Mayorkas, I think he was in like 4 or 5 Sunday shows, but the Sunday shows, they went after the administration. I mean, I think it was ABC. They actually put their power panel like down on the border. Chuck Todd says this is a political crisis for the administration. It's gotten so bad that Mother Jones and other lefty liberals, they're complaining about how the media is covering this because they're actually covering it.
Okay, so this is why this is such a big problem for Biden. The left has assumed, and they got the country to assume, that everything Trump did was bad, and he was always an idiot, and any decision he made was the dumbest possible decision, right? So now, you have a clear example of Trump was doing it right, Biden changed it, many bad things happened. You can't argue your way out of it. It is a crisis. They are back to massive facilities with hundreds and hundreds of kids in these big barns, stacked on top of each other, right? That they have to detain or whatever because, they're like, well, we asked them not to come. It's like, yeah, but you incentivize them coming, right? They don't listen to what you ask. They're looking at like, can I get money up there, right? So, this was one. It was like, we're changing this because, and so you go back and you ask, and I've been looking for the answer to this question. Why did you have to change this policy? What about the Trump policy was wrong? And they're like, well, it was not moral. It's like, well, it's not really moral to put kids in cages, right? Which is what your policy caused, right? So now they're going back, they're crawfishing, they're trying to put a bunch of the Trump policies back in place. They're trying to store people south of the border. They're down. They decided, oh, maybe we shouldn't have just, thrown those agreements that Trump made with the the Northern Triangle countries in the trash. Maybe that was a good idea. So now they're trying to redo all that. So now, so the bloom is off the rose because not everything Trump did was stupid and everything Biden did is enlightened and smart. We all have concrete proof of that now. So, we can look at energy and it's like, okay, Trump's approach gave us, $1.90 a gallon. Biden's approach gives us $3.20 a gallon. Which one of those is better, right? Most of us would say, there's a few people who make the argument that more expensive gas is good, hardcore leftist environmentalists. And, when it goes below a certain level, my friends in the oil patch squawk a little bit because they don't make as much money. And a lot of the money they put into production sits idle while they're waiting on, the market to fix itself. And there was some, in Biden's defense, there was some market correction was in order. And there was going to be a little bump in prices as we went to the summer blends and so forth. But I mean, no one was planning on $1 more a gallon, and it's going up. We're not done. It's $1.50 or $2 a gallon before they're done. And so now that's 2 big examples of, you couldn't just do it the way Trump had it. You had to change it for the sake of changing it, to show that, you are different, independent, and more wise and kind and all this. And that's twice it's blown up in their face. So maybe Trump wasn't incompetent. Maybe this is all about mean tweets,
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been an interesting study, because I think, people have been wondering, exactly how effective were Trump's policies. I mean, and he used, very effectively in 2016 to build the wall and do all of these things. And they really did clamp down on the border, and things seem to get better in the long run. And so now Biden,
better, and then they got dramatically worse.
Right. So Biden comes in, he starts to unwind these things. And as you just said, dramatically worse politically. This is a nightmare, just as Todd said. I mean, this is a real big risk for them, because they have a 2022 election. They have some senators coming up. We've got the House of Representatives coming up, and we've got a full-blown border crisis because Biden has just let it go. I mean, just the picture.
Okay, so like if you're going to do that, then you have to have some infrastructure in place to handle the things that are going to happen. And they acted like nothing would happen. There would be no consequences of changing all the incentives, right? So, I mean, you at some point you're like, this is a competence argument. It's not just an ideological argument. It's like, if you change what the government's incentivizing and you don't expect to change the behavior, you're not really smart enough to have that job, right?
Right. No, I mean, that's a great point. It's kind of like, okay, so what exactly did you think was going to happen when you basically opened everything up?
Yeah, and did you think about that? Was that even a consideration? Did that get discussed at the meeting? Because it doesn't seem like you laid any plans. Well, if things go bad, we're going to do this and this and this. It doesn't seem like they had that at all.
Right. Yeah. Right. And they were not prepared to figure out how to effectively test these people for COVID, and then what to do with the ones that tested positive. We're still dealing with this pandemic issue, and they're just letting people in.
They're just releasing people into the country they know are infected. They know it. They tested them positive, and then they let them go with nowhere to go. It's not like they can go quarantine at some house. They don't have a house.
Bob has now chimed in again here. As dissent from Democrats representing border districts grows, Biden administration crisis denials grow ever increasingly less credible. Mumbles will be in way over his head tomorrow, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And that's right. I mean, I think it was on Fox News this morning. They had one of those border town mayors who's a Democrat. And just, I mean, they're having a problem. I mean, I feel for these border towns that have just been inundated, right? I mean, all of a sudden there's this huge surge, and the administration is doing nothing. So now, even if you're a Democrat, you're like, what the heck is going on here? And even that kind of flippant thing with Kamala Harris. Where was she, in Florida the other day? And the press asked her if she was going to go to the border, and she just kind of cackled and said, "Oh, well, not today," type of a thing like that. She wasn't taking this thing seriously.
I don't think she understands, in her particular case, how big the coverage of her is, right? How big how much it matters. She thinks she's still dealing like with the state house in Sacramento, where you can just sort of say stuff, I mean, people are like, hey, she has no idea what's going on, and she's second in command. Right. And a lot of people, it's like, 40% of the country or so don't believe Biden's going to finish his term. So she would be the president, and she, maybe, I don't know. No one briefed me on that. Right. Isn't that what she said the other day?
Basically,
what about the border? No one's briefed me on that. Really? So you're not following it. You're just waiting on someone to come in and tell you what's happening.
I mean, the press is trying to ask a serious question. She just tries to laugh it off. I was like, how vice presidential is that? I mean, it's like, whoa, not a good look for her at all.
It's not. And they look flip. They look like they don't care. And they, when you track them down and pin them down, it's pretty clear they don't have answers for this. They don't know what's next. It's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse unless they go back to what Trump was doing. What I'm hoping is tomorrow night, when they talk to when they actually get to ask him questions. Like someone will say to him, Mr. President, why did you change? Right? What about the Trump policy was so bad that we had to change it? What were the changes and how did they address those shortcomings? And do you think any of this is working? Because it doesn't seem to be working, right? Can you point to any progress that we may not have seen? Because it may be out there and, you got to keep an open mind, but, something's badly wrong with this. And this is a huge problem. And, guys on our side are like, oh, they're letting in a bunch of Democrat voters. Well, they're a long way from being citizens and being able to vote. But you're also letting in a bunch of people who, it's Trump, Trump said you couldn't come in if you're a public charge. And most of these people are going to be public charges. They're going to have asylum claims that don't match up with the U.S. asylum law, and they may or may not have COVID. So, we got a crisis on our hands caused by this administration. There's no way to deny it.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up and see because I didn't have it up, but the so what you basically are talking about is Biden's first press conference, his first solo press conference. Tomorrow be what is it, like the 65th day or something like that? So
he was waiting to get some good stuff together.
So and Bob alluded to it in his comments. I mean, what are you expecting tomorrow? I mean, we're talking about Joe Biden, not having a teleprompter, right? I mean, he's going to have to be up there. He can make a statement, I guess, but then he has to answer questions. That he's going to be open for. That seems like that's a high risk situation for Joe Biden and the administration.
Well, and what Margaret Sullivan in the Post today is like, okay, reporters, this is your first big chance too with Biden. So make sure that you don't blow it. You don't ask a bunch of gotcha questions. It's like,
yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm sitting here like what she says. It's a big test for Biden, but it's a bigger test for the media.
Yeah, make sure you can behave and do your docile a little bit. But I think to me, for one thing, they keep letting in the Fox guy, Ducey's kid. Right. So every 3 days he gets a question because he gets in every 3 days because of the way they do the thing. So he gets a question. So I don't think they can keep out all the quote hostile. And it's a question of, is Fox really hostile to Biden? I would say probably not. They're at best indifferent and probably slightly favorable toward him. Right. And I think most Fox people who follow Fox and have gotten mad at Fox would agree with that. But I think some of these guys, I think it's getting to the point where they have been treated pretty shabbily. They have been shielded from information. They get nothing of it. I'll circle back to you and other little flip constructions from the Psaki or whatever her name is. And you're not getting any information. Things are going bad that they can't explain. Their explanations don't add up. At some point, if you're a reporter and you're covering all this, you're like, hey, I can't whitewash this anymore. I'm going to have to just go off and ask a question and write a real story. So it may be tomorrow. We'll see who can do it and how they will do it. But I look forward to seeing it. I'm glad there's no basketball on tomorrow because I want to see how this goes.
We know where your priorities lie. With regard to I don't know. I mean, this is going to be it'll be an interesting time because the White House has been very open in the sense of they've had a lot of press conferences with Jen Psaki, but they haven't necessarily had a lot of good questions answered.
Right.
So will the press ask some questions? And if Sunday is any indication of things, is that they better be prepared to have a really good solid answer about what they're going to do on the border. But it would be very easy for Biden to blunder on that, and create something there. I mean, they have really tried to avoid saying crisis. They want to say
right. So that's what I was about to say is is someone going to say, do you consider this a crisis? And it's like we get to play these word games and it's a distraction. Like they used to try to get to Obama to say, what was it? Something jihadi, something or other. Remember? They had some little phrase like that were trying to get Obama to say radical jihadi terrorist, and he never would say it, right? So, but this should not. Let's not subsume this into a word game over whether they call it a crisis. we can look from where we are and see that it's a crisis. So we don't need to debate the Biden administration about that. What we need to know is why they did this and how they're going to fix it. Because this is what, the American people pretty clearly didn't want this. They said that when it was going on in the Obama administration. They said that it was going on in the Trump administration. You're not winning votes with kids in cages on the border. You have a problem, and it is a problem, and it should be a problem, and you guys need to deal with it.
Yeah, they have to fix this, if not just for the sake of, their administration trying to show that they actually have, command and control and they know what they're doing, their competence level. But the 2022 election, if they don't solve this, the kind of the law and order, the strong border candidates that would emerge, could wipe out a lot of Democrats in 2022 on this. You can just point back to Trump and say, look, Donald Trump was right about this. And we have seen exactly what happens when the Democrats get in control and what happens with this. And it's a disaster.
Yeah, it is.
So I did want to ask you about something that, because it deals with spending. So the Republicans are now basically saying that, it's okay to do earmarks, I guess, in the House. I mean, they've lifted that.
Democrats said they were going to go back to doing earmarks.
Yeah.
They had been eliminated from the House, and now the Democrats said they'd come back. So what happened was the Republicans yesterday said, if they're going to do it, we should do it too. Which is right. Look, I'm pro earmarks. I mean, if you're going to spend money, federal government's going to spend money, I want someone I voted for or against name attached to it. So when we go to have the next election, if we didn't want that spending, we say, hey, my opponent, he spent on these things that we didn't need, and let's vote him out, right? I want accountability. I don't want it, decided by unelected bureaucrats in the bowels of some federal agency. If they're spending priorities, they're before Congress. Do you want the executive programming all the spending? Even when my guy was in there, I wasn't for that. I want accountability, but you let the electeds put their name on this. And if austerity ever becomes a virtue again in the federal government, which it could. I mean, you're going to get a debt shock at some point because, it's spinning out of control. They just approved, 2.1 trillion. Now they have another one for 3 trillion. And if that goes through, then, the people who lend us money around the world are going to say, okay, you guys are not really serious about this and have no plans to get serious about this. So, we probably should move on from lending you money, and it'll be interesting to see what we do about that.
All right, so that's an interesting take on the earmarks and the response. I kind of get the idea of accountability for the earmarks, but has, in your knowledge, because I haven't looked at this, has anybody really paid a price for the earmarks that they have supported that you know of? I mean, off the top of your head.
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example of one. Okay, when I was in college. Buddy Roemer came to speak. That was one of the biggest stories I had when I was in college. Buddy Roemer, do you remember him? He was in Congress, he was governor of Louisiana.
Yeah.
A really brilliant guy. Went to Harvard. He came to my school. He lived right across the river from where the school was there in Shreveport. He had a plantation that was like 5 miles away. And he spoke, and he talked about at that time they were talking about building the port of Shreveport. And it wasn't a lot of money. It was about that back then. It was $1.2 billion, something like that. And when Reagan started calling for, Reagan put out a call and said, hey, if we're, if you think something is wasteful spending, wasteful spending happens in every district. If it's in your district, Mr. Congress people, don't advocate for spending. It's okay to waste money in my district, but not everybody else, right? So Buddy Roemer took that to heart, and he said, if you dollar out this Port of Shreveport project, it doesn't dollar out. It's a lot of federal spending that doesn't generate enough jobs. And so he lost. The guy beat him who was buying votes on the street for $5 a vote. The guy ended up in jail, and his campaign people all ended up in jail. Buddy Roemer lost because, he opposed an earmark. So it did come up the other guy won with an earmark. So, I mean, it can work both ways, but that was a huge story. It was like, this guy's against the port of Shreveport. All of a sudden, his support collapsed. He'd have won. He did eventually get into Congress.
Right. Yeah, he did. Yeah. I mean, the thing, well, I mean, I'll have to say, I mean, I give Buddy Romer credit for standing up to his principles too, of just saying like, this made no sense. It made no economic sense.
That's right.
But
too often now, and it works. I mean, it's not the big. It's like he said, it's not a huge driver of the economy there, but it's not nothing.
Yeah. I just my general problem was that sometimes it's just that the earmarks tend to get out of control. Is that they just it just gets to be where everybody's throwing stuff out there, and like then you kind of
certain kinds of legislation too, the defense spending, infrastructure spending, Department of Interior spending, water projects, certain ones that kind of attract it. So
yeah, I mean that's. I guess that's the world we live in with the politics and everything else, and that's not sure there's a great way to fix that overall. The filibuster, so that's still out there. They're talking about it. I see that Elizabeth Warren is now trying to use race as a reason to get rid of it. I guess she's going back. I guess she's going back to the Civil War times, and
she said it was put in place by Democrats to right to stop civil rights legislation. She filibustered 17 bills in the last session of Congress. So it worked. It worked when it worked. What I fear is that Republicans think they're going to retake. They're pretty darn sure at this point they're going to retake the House, and the Senate's looking pretty good. So it could be that sure, let's get rid of it, and we will take advantage, just like they did on the votes for the judges. So I think the Democrats, you're not going to get everything you want, even though you have both houses of Congress. You have some stragglers. Joe Manchin equals Susan Collins, right? You can't really count on that vote for everything on your agenda. So they're just frustrated that there's a couple of things they can't quite get over the finish line, and usually the cooler heads prevail on this stuff. I have not heard majority leader say that he is for this. So. I think without him, it has a hard time making it through.
Yeah, I mean, and what does it say? I mean, the Democrats, I think when they got rid of it for the judicial nominations, I think that came back to bite them big time. So you have to kind of watch out. You have to watch out what you're going to wish for. But what does it say for the Senate? I mean, the Senate is kind of been known as the great deliberative body.
Cooling saucer. That's what it's there for.
Right. And so, they're kind of, it's part of the check and balance against all the stuff that happens in the House. And so, I mean, if you get rid of the filibuster, does that make the Senate all that much different than the House?
Right. And you look at it, it's working. It's not working like the Democrats want it to work right now, but the House is ready to pass this gun legislation, all they want and more, immediately. Could do it today, right? They've already passed the $3 trillion next round of stimulus that no one knows is needed, with more checks going out the door, more, payments to Democrat constituencies, right? Okay. So where does that go to get, that idea go to get baked a little bit and see if it really works? And the place it goes is the Senate. And, so the, legislation races through the House, slows down in the Senate. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, so I'll be curious to see how that goes, but it does seem that we're getting kind of this big push by the left. I mean, this is the progressive left is really pushing the Democrats really hard for this agenda, and they're just trying to tear down everything. They have high expectations, I guess, that they can get their crazy policies through, and the filibuster would make it a lot easier for them to get their nutty policies through. And
the radicals do not care if they lose in 2022. They're like, get all we can now, clean it up later. Okay. I guess some of them think, hey, if we do radical leftist policies, we'll win more. Right. But I mean, that's pretty clearly not the case. So.
All right. So you had mentioned a little bit earlier about foreign policy and everything so, we have talked about it here on the show about just kind of how the world is looking at us. in terms ever since Trump left. And I think, as we've said, and you mentioned too, I mean, China is definitely one of the big ones. I mean, they had this discussion, whatever you want to call it, this meeting up in Alaska. And I just don't think it went well for the U.S. at all. I mean, China just came out and kind of ripped us up, and we just didn't handle this well.
Yeah, and you know what? That was one where you kind of have to hand it to the media, because there was no way to spin that was we got treated roughly, we got bullied, right? The other thing is, like, Democrats, they want to start out this thing, and they always do this because they know that they are perceived as weak on defense, right? So the first thing they do, as soon as they can find Putin or Xi, in China, is they insult them, right? You guys are against freedom. You're hurting the Uyghurs and this, that, and the other, right? And so they're like, so like the last guy, he didn't say we were wonderful people, but he didn't start every conversation with a big insult. So, hey, if you're going to insult us, guess what? You have some race problems too. You do some discrimination, you cruelty and stuff to people too, right? And who are you to talk to us about it when your record is what your record is? Now, you cannot compare what has happened in this country with what has happened in China. But, it's massive, it is systemic, it is systematic, and it is, comprehensive. But, here, yes, we have some injustices, but what's the difference? We address them, right? There's a reason everybody in the world knows what Black Lives Matter is because, we're having that national discussion, are the police too hard on Black people? What could we do to fix it? Some people say defund. I think that's a little, that's shown to have been counterproductive, right? The places that have done it have sharp spikes in crime and so forth. But we are addressing the complaint. China is not, scratching its chin, figuring out what to do with the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are going to get what they're going to get. There's nothing, if you're for them, there's nothing anybody can do to help you. You're going to lose that argument. So, their point is not well taken, but they thought, they perceived that they had people they could bully, and they bullied them, and they got completely away with it too. So now, they went, this meeting started off as being cast as, the start of a new U.S.-China dialogue on new footing, right? And now it's like, this is a one-off just to find out where everybody stood, because the Chinese have told them, we don't need to hear from you anymore. We need something out of you. We'll slap it out of you, right? And so that's basically where we are with China right now. And they, they're compromised. The Chinese have a lot of stuff on Biden and his son. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, but it looks like the FBI somehow has mysteriously lost Hunter Biden's laptop. They were investigating. They cannot find that thing anywhere. Can you believe that?
How convenient.
But the thing about it is like, the problem with it is, they were never going to do that much to him anyway, right?
Right.
The problem is, it's like you can no longer believe in the justice system. So you can no longer believe that, when they try to do wildly unconstitutional things to gun grabbing, that the courts will stand up, because the courts are not reliable, right? Not even the Supreme Court with the 3 Trump appointees can be relied upon to properly uphold the law. So, it's scary times in America. We need to get these people out of office as quickly as we can.
Speaking about trying to get people out of office, the Democrats are trying to remove someone from office in Iowa who was duly elected, certified, seated, serving in the U.S. House of Representatives. And so they've got, what is it called? The House Administration Committee or something like that? Yeah. I guess along party lines voted to kind of move forward to see if they can't get Rita Hart in there and throw out this, what's her name? Miller Meeks or whatever.
Yeah, Miller Meeks. Yeah.
Marjorie Miller Meeks. This, I don't know. I mean, I know that they have, I guess they've overturned some in the past, but I don't recall whether or not, I didn't study whether or not they actually did it after the representative was actually seated.
Right. And they haven't found the 6 votes. Right. It's like, we got this stack of 200 votes that overrules your 6 votes. They don't have, it's still like, she's 6 votes short, and that's close enough for us. They don't have anything that proves that she should not have lost by 6 votes. It's totally Just we're just going to take this seat because it was a real close election. You know, there are Democrats, by the way, speaking out on that too, saying, you know, that's a bad idea. You know, they won that election fair and square, and we need to move on.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, there are Democrats who won some very close races, and they're like, "This is not good." You know.
Yeah.
I mean, I
party
think
changes hands. They're going to come after me. You know.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what they're worrying about. So they're smart about that. Bob has chimed in again. To prove effective, national security and foreign policy rhetoric must be matched by concrete action. Absent the latter, the former is counterproductive. That's simple. Time will tell how such action plays for Biden administration vis-a-vis China, both China and Russia. Very true. So anyway, all right. So we are, we're coming up to the end. Let's do 2 minutes.
Well, there's a bunch of things. Let me look at a bunch of stuff. Make sure that I don't miss any of the good stuff. So I guess Miami Beach has said no. They basically curfewed the town out of the spring break business because those were some wild fights. I don't know if you saw any of that video, but you know, and I'm not sure who was fighting who, but man, there was some swinging. There was some good old street violence down there. I do want to say something about the CDC has dropped its recommendation for schools that, you know, that they were saying everybody had to be 6 feet apart. Now they're saying 3 feet apart. That's a big difference because,
huge.
You know, schools were routinely saying we can't bring everybody back because of the 6 feet requirement. With the 3 feet requirement, that's basically what they have. That's basically normal desk space, right? So you can bring everybody back. And so now, like Randy Weingarten, who remember told us, you know, I was the first one trying to get teachers back in schools. No, you weren't, you lying union hack, right? He's like, well, I'm not sure that's, you know, where did they get the science from that? Well, Randy, here's where they got the science from it. The science always said, and Nick Fauci will verify this, right? The science has always said 3 feet was all you needed. But when they started out with this, they're like, okay, if we tell people 3 feet, will they really understand like how far 3 feet is, right? And so to make sure they say 3 feet, we're going to say 6, because then we know we'll get at least 3, right? It's like the speed limit's 55. The cop doesn't write you the ticket at 56. He writes you the ticket at 68, right?
Right.
You know, so there was never any science that said 3 feet wasn't safe. It did not exist. So they are what they are.
Right. I mean, and that's, you know, that's the thing I was waiting for, were the reaction from the teacher unions and things like that, because it's just like they're already fighting returning to in-person learning, you know, with the 6 foot rule. Now, you know, got chopped in half, allowing more students to come to the school. You know, most of these guys they're not interested in the students' welfare and their teaching at all. I mean, you mentioned, you know, you kind of alluded to earlier about just kind of the mental health, you know, crisis. This has been a really big problem for kids of all ages, having been out of school for a year and all this weird hybrid distance learning and everything that's going on. It's hard to keep those poor kids on an even keel with this. They don't get to play sports. They haven't had the socialization, all these kinds of things that they need. They haven't had, and the teachers are the biggest roadblock to all of
it. Basically, the only roadblock at this point.
Right. So it's just too bad about
one more thing I wanted to warn that, you know, America's waste baskets are filled to capacity with wadded up NCAA brackets.
I mean, it's like, I don't know. I did want to ask you this though, before we go on the whole thing, because what we've seen here is we've seen this huge push for equality with the women's and the men's. You know, as you coach a lot of girls, younger girls teams and things like this. I mean, how do you feel about this? Some of the things that.
Okay, so I guess what you're talking about is, and we're almost out of time, so I got to go. Yeah. Is the NCAA looking at the locker rooms and so forth, like what was provided to the men versus what was provided to the women? First of all, the NCAA is the most politically correct, woke organization in this country, bar none. How could they get this wrong? How could they have 10 times better weight room for the men than for the women? You know, how could it's, you know, it's not a revenue question, right? They have enough money to buy 2 good weight rooms worth of stuff for these hotels or wherever they're setting this stuff up, right? It's not a money issue. And, you know, if it is, then you should cut out something else and put the money on this, right? It's just rank. You guys are not as important. And, they're the people who are in charge of enforcing that they are equally important, right? They're the ones. This is direct dereliction of your duty. And, heads ought to roll out of this. Mark Emmett ought to go. I mean, he didn't run a good tournament this year. He screwed up a lot of this, and they need to find somebody who can do this right.
Yeah, it's just horrific to see this. But yeah, I mean, you're right about the PC wokeness. I mean, they're all over Title IX and extending that to ridiculous extremes and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like they totally blew this.
One more note on college before we go. If someone sexually assaults a woman and that guy is in your program, you need to tell the cops and kick him out, right? LSU right now, the former president of LSU had gone to Oregon State. He just got fired yesterday as president of Oregon State because of covering up sexual abuse allegations at LSU. So LSU, big unfolding scandal there, and we haven't even gotten to the basketball coach yet.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed it. Bob said that it was an utter blunder by Emmert and company, just brutal, which we all agree on. Thanks for joining us. Please, as always, stay safe, stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. God bless America, and we will see you next Wednesday.